I'm sure you're familiar with the saying, don't mix business with pleasure, but as a photographer, I like to do the complete opposite. Photography for me is not just a means of making a living, it's also something I'm very passionate about, and I've had many clients say that passion comes over through my photo shoots. Something else I've loved from an early age is motorcycling, so what can be better for me but combine those two passions? And in April 2019, I was fortunate enough to tick something off my bucket list, and that's to go on a motorcycle trip to the Scottish Highlands on this, my Suzuki GSX-S 750. My way of relaxing over the last few years is having days out riding with my biking buddies, Liska, Harley Dave and my daughter Melissa, who loves to ride pillion. I also love attending biking events, including the British Superbikes, and of course I love taking my camera with me. I practice shooting high-speed action and motorcycle lifestyle photography whenever I get the chance. As I shoot what I love, I was hoping I would one day be able to add a motorcycle brand to my list of clients. Fortunately for me, all my practicing has paid off. I'm very pleased to be working with Hideout Leather, who manufacture bespoke motorcycle clothing, and also with Lings, Triumph Essex, who are a Triumph dealership in Great Dunmow. As well as creating lifestyle images for Hideout, I photographed their entire range of clothing for their new website, and had the pleasure to meet and photograph some of the riders they sponsor at different race events throughout the year, and mix with other top British superbike riders too. When you do what you love, it really doesn't feel like you're working. Although I had visited Scotland once before for one of my corporate clients on a photography project, I've never had the opportunity to ride there, which is something I've always wanted to do. I didn't want my trip to just be a riding holiday, and where possible I wanted to explore on foot. Walking to the top of Beinn Eighe in my motorcycle boots is something I'll never forget. I also wanted to capture a selection of the shots of me with my bike and clothing for Hideout, which they could use for their marketing, social media and new website. From the moment I left home on my long haul from Essex to Scotland, the entire trip was incredible. I had hours of GoPro footage as I travelled across Scotland trying to stick to my well-planned itinerary. It's very difficult, almost impossible for me to say which locations were my favourite, quite honestly. It was the combination of each day, the people I met and stayed with, the views and the riding, which made the whole experience incredible. Now I don't really do languages or pronunciations, so please excuse my very bad attempt at Gaelic. Visiting Glenelg and Glenelg was without doubt one of my favourite locations. They are both absolutely stunning. As I rode towards Glenelg, I was on the lookout for Etive Mor Waterfall. Unfortunately for me, I bumped into another photographer who knew exactly where it was. But before I went to visit the falls, I wanted to ride along the Glen. I actually stopped off the main road to take a few shots and was asked by another tourist driving by if I knew the location where they filmed James Bond's Skyfall. I'm sorry, I had to say, I have no idea. It wasn't until I returned home I found out it just so happens I was standing in exactly the same location where one of the scenes with Bond and his Aston Martin was filmed. I'm pleased to say I still have a good art director's eye. That afternoon I parked my bike and after a little chocolate fix I went exploring around Etive Mor Waterfall. I took this shot with my camera mounted on my Manfrotto tripod. I had 10 seconds using the camera timer to run across the rocks and get into position. I absolutely love being able to have the time to admire the view and breathe in the fresh air. I really would love to visit here again, but next time take my walking boots and go exploring just a little bit further. That evening, while I was sat eating dinner, I noticed how quickly the light was changing, so I quickly finished up my food, jumped back on my bike and rode out of the town along the A82 to capture this dramatic sunset. The next day was light rain, but it didn't dampen my spirit, neither did it actually penetrate my waterproofs. I visited the Beinn Eighe Centre and was told by one of the staff who also rides to continue along the road, the C1162. Although it's a dead end, it was well worth a little detour. I then made my way to the A830 to Glen and on to Glenelg, where I decided to hop on the ferry to the Isle of Skye and follow the road across the Skye Bridge to the Loch. I really love this area of Scotland around Dorney. I was very excited to visit Eilean Castle. My hosts that evening, Keith and Beverly, really went out their way to make me comfortable in their beautiful home, which had stunning views all around them. This was also just a short ride from the Pass of the Cattle, Beinn which I had seen images of and for me was one of the must-go-to places I wanted to visit. The next morning I was taking it easy at the castle as it was my rest day, and I overheard other bikers say they had just come from the Pass of the Cattle and the weather was incredible, with blue skies and perfect conditions. I couldn't resist the urge to get on my bike and go visit. Although I'd only had one day of light rain so far during my trip, you never can tell in Scotland what the weather would do, and the following day may be wet and misty, so off I went. It is jaw-dropping from the moment you ride in on the A896, which alone is an incredible road of long sweeping fast turns, to your first glance at the past, which again looks like it should be in Lord of the Rings. This part of Scotland is breathtaking. If you're a motorcyclist and you have never been to Scotland, then you are missing out. I approached Beinn Eighe with caution, as I'd heard the road is not for the faint-hearted. I'm sure you can see why. I took my time, and as I rode through this historic pass which cuts through the mountain, I actually found it easier to ride along than I'd imagined.
After riding all the way to the viewpoint, I turned around and parked so I could capture images of my bike and this incredible landscape. I couldn't wait to return here again the following day, but what I didn't realise then was that I was very nearly going to kick the bucket on this, my bucket list trip to Scotland. Hi, I'm Phil Jones and welcome back to part 2 of my adventures in Scotland. We finished part 1 with me at the top of Beinn Eighe, just enjoying myself in the sunshine and taking photos of me, my bike and the beautiful landscape which surrounded me. The sharp-eyed ones amongst you may have noticed my GoPro footage stopped just when I was nearly at the top of the pass, with the hairpin turns left to negotiate. Unfortunately, my battery died just at the last minute. I wouldn't want you to miss out on seeing this awesome road, so here's a little bit of footage of me riding back down. I was in no hurry to ride at speed down the pass, as I wanted to admire the view. I even stopped a couple of times so I could just take a look at the scenery and take a few more shots. That evening I was staying at Glenelg, which was about a 90-minute ride from the pass, and my route back took me along the old military road. I don't know why, but I really wasn't expecting to see such stunning scenery. It doesn't matter where you go in that part of Scotland, it's all absolutely incredible. I arrived at my next Airbnb accommodation just as the sun was beginning to drop, and after meeting my host for the evening and being greeted with a cup of tea and a Kit Kat, I was able to get out of my motorcycle gear, back into civvies and go for a stroll along the stony beach. Although I didn't get to see it myself, there is a turntable ferry just a short ride away which takes you across the water to the Isle of Skye. And in fact, this is the closest you'll get from mainland Scotland to Skye. But I was able to chat to a few friendly locals who were admiring the view. I later took this shot of the clouds rolling across the tops of the hills on the Isle of Skye opposite. I had a nice relaxed start the following morning and enjoyed cleaning my bike in the sunshine while taking in the views. I took a muck-off travel kit with me, as I hate nothing more than riding a dirty bike. The plan that day was to ride from Glenelg to Applecross, then on to Ullapool. But as you will shortly see, things didn't quite go as planned. The first part of my journey was just as amazing as it was the day before. I was taking my time, letting the sunshine dry off the roads and feeling grateful for the awesome weather I was being blessed with. I had my GoPro set up on my chesty harness and decided to capture a little bit of footage as I rode back along the old military road. I mentioned in part 1 how amazing it was riding on the A896, and I was really looking forward to going back again. You can see for yourself how the roads consist of long, fast sweeping turns, and although the surface is a little rough, it doesn't stop you having an awesome ride. When I arrived once again at Beinn I had made my mind up to stop at the bottom of the pass and take a few images of my Suzuki GSX-S 750 with the mountain range in the background. This is where it all started to go horribly wrong. I parked and positioned my bike safely, then with my camera and GoPro in hand started taking a few shots of my bike. After taking a few handheld shots, I set my Canon 5D camera on my Manfrotto B3 Live travel tripod and started looking for the best angle. I was still in no rush, but excited to be there, enjoying every minute, crouching down and moving around to find the best possible angle to get the shot. I decided I needed a little bit more distance from the bike, so I stepped down to the next level, and to my complete surprise and horror, the next thing I knew, I was face down in a bog, still holding my camera, which was now completely submerged in the mud and water. My motorcycle boots, leather jeans, jacket and base layers were soaked through and covered in mud. My Canon 5D Mark IV and 24-105mm lens was dripping wet, and now I was panicking. I lost all the images from my SanDisk memory card. Here's a few video clips I shot immediately after this happened.
So, just taking these shots of the bike and decided to jump down onto the dry land down there. Except, as you can see where I landed, it wasn't dry. I am soaked. Can't rinse this out whilst filming. Absolutely drenched. With the 5D Mark IV, so I'm hoping everything's going to be alright on there. All the pictures are on there. We can get those out now actually. Okay, so I'm at this amazing location, taking some pictures of the bike, Beinn Eighe, the cattle pass. So I'm doing a little bit of GoPro work, showing some Manfrotto stuff. Got the old Canon there. So finding the angles, unbelievable, no one around, you know, get the occasional car passing by. So I decided to jump down, or climb down, here onto the grass below. Except, that isn't solid. Not being much of a traveller, I didn't really realise in all my excitement, that area there, you can make out the shape of my body as I've gone face down into the bog. So left leg, right leg, face, arm, camera into the bog. There's my boots, camera is drenched. I've taken the card out. My top, you can see where my arm's gone. Don't know if you can see that. Where my arm's gone into the water, dry there. I've gone that far down. That's dripping wet. My other top is dripping wet. My boots, guess what? Yeah, so I've had a proper dunking. Quite happy. I'm a bit annoyed because I'm not quite sure what's happening with the camera at the moment, and I hope my card's going to be okay. But as you can see, for my arms have gone that far into the water, pushing myself up. I literally thought I was stuck in there for a moment. Boot is wet. Fortunately, bike's nice and dry.
As I mentioned in my phone footage, I was not only absolutely drenched, but covered in mud too, and my camera was soaked. As I had all my clothes with me in my Oxford bag, I decided to get out of my wet things, lay them on the nearby rocks to dry, and do my best to laugh about the experience, which, as you can imagine, wasn't easy. I had no choice but to wait for my protective clothing to dry off. My Knox base layers would dry in no time, but my motorcycle boots were still soaking wet, and as I still had a long journey ahead of me to get to my next accommodation, I made the decision it would be safer for me to ride in my trainers, which I never like to do.
So people think that I'm camping. It's not the video I thought I'd be making.
for Hideout Leather. But that's the adventures of Phil Jones. Couldn't have picked a nicer day to fall in a bog in Scotland at the place that I've always wanted to go to. What I didn't realise then was I was only minutes away from having another dramatic event in the Scottish Highlands, being the closest I had ever been to having a motorcycle accident. Cleaned these boots this morning, they were immaculate. Hi, I'm Phil Jones and welcome back to the final part of my adventures in Scotland. In part 1 I took you on my journey from Essex to the Scottish Highlands, where I visited the stunning area of Glenelg and Glenelg before making my way across to the Isle of Skye and to the area around Eilean Castle and Beinn Eighe. As you've seen in part 2, not everything went according to plan when I went back to visit the Pass of the Cattle, and I ended up falling face first into a Scottish bog whilst wearing my motorcycle gear and holding my rather expensive Canon 5D Mark IV camera. After waiting a few hours for my clothes to dry out in the sun, the next part of my journey was to ride back along the A896 through Beinn Eighe and make my way to Lapse, where I will be staying that night. Because of my incident in the bog, I didn't have time to ride to Applecross as I had planned, but I did however want to ride up the Cattle Pass one more time, as that was one location which was high on my list of must-see places to visit. If you've seen part 1, you would know that I rode up the pass the day before and spent time taking photographs or admiring this incredible view. As I made my way back up the pass again, what I didn't realise then was how close I would be to having a motorcycle accident. The conditions were amazing. I had already put the morning's events behind me as I rode confidently. I kept well within the speed limit and made sure I either stopped or pulled over when faced with a vehicle coming the opposite way. I was about halfway up the pass when I saw a car coming down the hill towards me. I made a quick decision to keep moving at around 20 miles an hour, but pulled over to the edge of the road, giving them plenty of room to pass. Then, just as it was too late for me to do anything about it, I had noticed a tarmac broken away at the edge of the road, and I was about to go down a long rut. I had nowhere to go but down it and ride it out. It all happened so quickly, as these things do. The bike flew out of the rut and I fought it like a wild horse just for a couple of seconds. My off-road motocross skills came in handy. I also believe my guardian angels were certainly with me that day too, as I'd never been so close to having a bike accident. The poor car driver coming the other way looked horrified as she witnessed me being just inches from riding down the verge and possibly into the rocks below. If nothing else, I hope that you learn from my mistakes and make sure that you really take your time when riding these types of roads. After pulling over to check my tyres and wheels, I decided I'd had enough of the Pass of the Cattle for one day and turned around to make my way to Beinn Eighe Cafe and Gallery, where I was treated to a lovely cappuccino and a hug from the owner after telling her about my day. I must admit, I wasn't looking forward to riding the next stage of my journey on the A896 through Beinn Eighe, but I had to get back on my bike, as they say. My confidence was at an all-time low, and I still had a 100-mile journey to do, and wanted to enjoy the scenery as much as I could, which honestly wasn't easy. I would really love to see this part of Scotland again, as I didn't relax or enjoy it as much as I know I could have. As you can see for yourself, the views and scenery are absolutely stunning, as you expect from this part of Scotland. My Canon camera was still unusable since I plunged it in the Scottish bog, but I did have my GoPro Hero 6 and my iPhone camera to capture the shots from the rest of my trip. After stopping at Kinlochewe service station and visiting the best loos in the UK and buying myself a North Coast 500 t-shirt, I made my way to Ullapool. I did include in my itinerary to visit Knockan Crag National Nature Reserve, but because I arrived in Ullapool so late in the day, I decided to give it a miss. My Airbnb host, Rosie, was incredible and could tell I was mentally drained from the day. I took Rosie's advice and ran a hot bath, and she kindly gave me a glass of whiskey to take with me to help me relax. The next morning I woke up to a beautiful day, and after the most amazing breakfast I had a short walk to take in the views and phoned my insurance company to report my accident with my camera. I had also planned to have an early start and ride from Ullapool back to Essex, but had a change of mind and booked another night at my very first accommodation at Renton. But before I did, Rosie had persuaded me to ride further north along the A835 past Knockan Crag National Nature Reserve and doing a loop before heading south. Visiting Knockan Crag National Nature Reserve was like stepping back in time to the time of the dinosaurs. The mountain range is incredible. Its rugged mountains and dramatic landscape have to be seen to be believed. I didn't have time to go exploring, but I did want to stop for a moment to take in the views. I parked up to admire the view, and in the parking bay was a tour bus and a handful of people who were watching a golden eagle and a buzzard through their binoculars. The guide then came over to me and passed me his binoculars and pointed out the golden eagle hovering above us. Wow, what a trip and what amazing memories. I felt so privileged that a total stranger would give me such an amazing opportunity to see a golden eagle flying in its natural surroundings. After riding a loop on the A837, I made my way back down towards Inverness and down the A82 past Loch Ness, where I couldn't resist stopping, especially as I had such amazing weather and not even a cloud in the sky. The final stretch that day was back to Glenelg for one last look. At this point, I decided to record a time-lapse video of my journey from Glenelg to Loch Lomond, where I'll be staying again that night. The next day was the 430-mile journey back to my home in Essex. After saying a quick hello to my family when I arrived and removing my Oxford bag, I rode down the road to give my bike a thorough clean at the jet wash. In total, I covered 1,690 miles in 8 days, and I don't honestly think I would change anything. It's the previous experiences which make you who you are today, and although I would rather not have fallen in the bog or nearly crashed my bike, the events certainly gave me an adventure in Scotland I will never forget.